What's up, YouTube? Let me get some light in here. Oh, this kind of caught me off guard. I'm just trying to learn how to go live. I'm just learning how to do this, so bear with me here. Well, basically, the reason why I want to come on here is because I want to talk about rightly dividing the word, because all throughout my life, I've always been searching for the right church. You know, I never was the type of person that went to church every Sunday. I didn't grow up in a church, but occasionally, you know, my mother took me to church. Occasionally, not that often, seldomly we went to church. Mostly it was around Easter time. Few times, went to Pentecostal churches. I got baptized. I didn't know it at the time, but I think it was a Methodist church. But, throughout my adolescent years, I've been going to Baptist churches and, I've been going to Pentecostal churches. A couple of times I got saved, what you would call getting saved or being born again. And I actually been baptized 4 times in my life. Recently, about a month ago. The first time I was baptized, I was around the age of 10, but I never understood what baptism was for. Even up to the time that I got baptized last month, I never even understood what baptism was for. But now I understand that, from what I understand, that baptism is like when the priests back in the days in the Old Testament, when the priests would accept, before they go into the temples to accept the sacrifices of the people who were sinning, and they would bring the animal sacrifice to the priest, they would have to go wash themselves before they go into the temples. So the nation of Israel, they were to become earthly priests to lead the rest of the nations of the world back to God. That's what the plan was. So when Jesus had his earthly ministry, and he was telling people to repent and be baptized, he was basically talking to the nation of Israel. They're the ones that were supposed to be repenting and being baptized, because they were supposed to be the priests, the nation of priests that was going to teach the rest of the nation. So that's the whole ideal behind baptism, which brings me to my point about rightly dividing the word. Now, when we talk about the plan of God, we have to understand, when you look in the Bible, and one of the reasons why it's so confusing is because there were different ministries. Because if you read in the book of Hebrews the book of Hebrews chapter 1 verse 1, it says that God talked to the prophets in sundry times in diverse manners, meaning that in the olden days, in ancient days, God spoke through his prophets in different manners. In other words, he told the different prophets different things to say. And he didn't tell Jeremiah the same thing that he told Ezekiel. So that's basically what that means. And this is what I'm getting to. The prophets from Adam, which Adam was a prophet, Adam to like Noah, those people. Well, let me back up. Moses, the prophets from Moses up until John the Baptist, those were what you call Old Testament prophets. And they were basically under the law. They had a different ministry. So all of the prophets that spoke, they was under what you would call the circumcision or the old covenant program, where even when Jesus came, he still followed that old covenant program. And this is why he said, I didn't come to do away with the law. I came to fulfill the law. In other words, that the Old Testament, when he says, search the scriptures and in them you will find me, if they would only have searched the scriptures, the entire Old Testament was basically a shadow leading to Jesus Christ, and he fulfilled them because he did the same thing that they did all the way from Moses up to Jesus, up until that cross. It was the same program. He did the same thing. You know, he went to the synagogue, he followed the Sabbath, he did it all. He did the same thing. He came to fulfill the law. That was the program. So everything that all when he was doing his earthly ministry, talking to the Jews and telling people not to go to the Gentiles and not to go to the Samaritans, and telling the Gentile lady, like, look, get out of here. My message is only for the lost sheep of Israel, because that's what his message was for. Only for the lost sheep of Israel. Repent and be baptized. All of that stuff was for the nation of Israel. All of that salvation and thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. The nation of it, that all that was for the nation of Israel. It wasn't for the Gentiles. The Gentiles knew that God wasn't for them. They knew that the God of Isaac, Abraham, and Jacob was not for them. They knew that. They had their other gods. And the Israelites knew that God wasn't for them. That God wasn't for the Gentiles. They had their other gods. But it wasn't, nobody expected the Jews. I mean, it was prophesied, but they really didn't read the scriptures, but it wasn't planned. I mean, it was in God's ultimate plan for the Jews to reject the Messiah. But the Jews, they was expecting their kingdom, but they didn't know that they didn't realize that they were rejecting the Messiah and basically preventing their own kingdom from coming on earth. I mean, they was expecting a warrior Messiah. They was expecting somebody like maybe like a Hercules, or like a Hannibal. I mean, they was expecting somebody to come in there, round them up, start a revolution, basically like a terrorist, somebody like Osama bin Laden, that was going to lead raids on the Romans and stuff like that. Just, destroy the Romans and, set up an earthly kingdom. And that was their salvation. But they rejected that. So since they rejected that, the plan of salvation for the Jews to be the beacon of light for the rest of the nations couldn't happen. So another plan had to come into effect, and that's the plan. That's the mystery gospel where Paul comes in, which Paul was a stout enemy of the followers of Jesus. Now, they wasn't called followers of Jesus or followers of Christianity back in the day. They were called followers of the way, because there was no such thing of Christianity. They were called followers of the way. And Paul, you know, he was like one of the worst enemies of Christ. So what Christ did was in order for the plan to work, Christ took his worst enemy and poured out grace on his worst enemy, which Paul, being a Jew, I mean, Paul was a Jew's Jew. I mean, he was like what we would call in the Marine Corps. You know, I'm a former Marine. I'm a retired firefighter, and we call them stem whackers. A stem whacker is a person that is like keep their boots shined, keep their brass shined, always in the books. They're hardcore for the Marine Corps, or they're hardcore for the fire. You know, they're just hardcore for the Army, or, you know, they're just hardcore for the police department. They're hardcore for whatever program. They're just down for it. You know, you can't, they lived that life. That's how Paul was. He lived that Jewish life as far as the law. He knew it up. He knew it in the sleep. Up, down, and sidesway. So that's how Paul was. But he knew it in the way that, because you got to remember, people, it wasn't only the 10 Commandments that was the law. There was over 613 laws. Plus, there was a whole bunch of Jewish traditions that they had incorporated into the law. And so when Jesus came along, and he was talking his talk, but he was kind of like modifying it with his wise saying, you know, it was throwing them off a little bit. So they thought that he was kind of like breaking the tradition. Well, he was. He was going against their tradition. He wasn't really going against the law. He was going against their tradition. Because basically what he was doing was he was getting followers going against their tradition, and he was like breaking the status quo, and people was like, oh shoot, if people start following this dude, you know, we're not going to be important. They're going to be following him. We're not going to be important. And, you know, who's this guy? You know, he's talking blasphemy. You know, it's just, you know, like some of these people, you know, like they're like dogmatic with their religion, you know, like you got some people like, I mean, they're so hardcore and dogmatic with the religion. Like you got some people like followers of the Nation of Islam, or follower of Osama bin Laden. Not that I'm comparing the Nation of Islam with terrorist groups and Osama bin Laden, but you got some people that's so hardcore in their beliefs that if you do something that might be a little bit against what they believe, they're ready to kill you, especially back in that day, you know. And that's how they were with Jesus when he was doing his teaching, and that's how they are with Paul, with their teachings. Now, so from Moses up until, you know, like from Moses, all of the prophets, like Moses, the major prophets, I don't really know them, you know, because I'm not really deep into the Bible, but I'm going to be studying more and more. But I can name some of the big prophets like Moses, Daniel, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. Then you got some little prophets like Amos and Nehemiah, or, whatever. You got prophets all the way up into the book of Malachi, and then after the book of Malachi, you got the book of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, right? But up into Malachi, right, which they say is the Old Testament, but that's not really where the Old Testament ends. So after that, there was not another prophet. God didn't, it was silent. God didn't send another prophet to the people until John the Baptist. John the Baptist was the last prophet that came to the Israelites. And there was a 400-year gap. John the Baptist was the last prophet until Jesus came to get the Israelites in line. Because when God made that Abrahamic covenant with Abraham to pull out a special people, to make a special nation, to bring the rest of the world, to reconcile the rest of the world back to God, that nation failed. Even though he sent them prophet after prophet after prophet, they killed all the prophets, that special nation. They killed all the prophets, the Jews. And we can argue who those Jews are. Me personally, I don't think the Jews are the people that are living in Israel now. Me personally, I believe the Jews, I don't believe they're the 12 people on the, I don't believe it's that 12 chart that they have in New York City, or, these Hebrew Israelites that dressed up in costumes. But I do believe if there are a Jewish race, and according to a lot of people, they're supposed to be dark-skinned people. If you want to look at the Bible in an esoteric way, if there is a Jewish race or a Hebrew race, I can't, I'm gonna have to say that those people are the Negro people living over here in America. That's my thing. I think that all those Indiana Jones movies that you see, the search for the Ark, and or the big secret, the big mystery, that's whatever, the eighth wonders of the world and all of that stuff, of who the true Jews are. I think it's the black man living in America. But I'm kind of like getting off topic. I'm kind of getting off topic because I think we fit the prophecies of Deuteronomy. I guess it's chapter 68 Deuteronomy chapter 15. Deuteronomy 28. No, not 28. What chapter is it? Deuteronomy 28, 15 through 68, I think it is. Deuteronomy 28, chapter 15. Deuteronomy 28, verses 15 through 68 or 65, one of those. So I just want to see how this goes. I don't know. I know nobody's watching. I'm just trying to figure out how do I get people to watch my videos.